We're motivated to rebuild the most capable military in the world. That's why I'm here. That's what the president has asked me to do. But doing so does require tough decisions, and we are prepared to make them.
Wow, is he ever. In fact, that leads with fire the generals, doing something that just has shocked the conventional world, shocked the Pentagon world, and man, is it long overdue. Overnight, if you hadn't seen it, first of all, President Trump fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General A.Q. Brown. It wasn't an ugly kind of thing. In fact, he was very polite and complimentary to the general when he did so. But then here comes Hegseth on the heels of that, who fired 5 additional generals. My only comment is, I hope this isn't the end. I hope that there's a lot more to come, because there needs to be. And this is certainly nothing new that I've come up to. Actually, in 2013, while still in active duty, authored a piece in the Armed Forces Journal that was called Purge the Generals. And in that article, I wrote, replace a substantial chunk of today's generals, starting with the 3- and 4-star ranks. This is likely the most controversial step, yet also the most necessary. It is unlikely that today's top leaders, who are products and benefactors of the existing system, have the appropriate motivation or buy-in for substantial change. New leadership is required. Now, that was in the context of the ongoing Afghanistan war. I had already written in both 2009, 2010, and 2012 that we were headed towards a defeat in Ukraine, in Afghanistan. Sorry, getting those failures mixed up in my mind. And I said then, listen, it is a product of generalship. And it was self-evident that we were going in the wrong direction. It wasn't even just the battlefield. There was also, and I laid an extensive article. By the way, the link is in the description here if you want to read what I wrote back then and the things that I identified, all of which have gotten worse since that time. But it always starts at the top. If the leader is not on board with what needs to happen, if the leader is not forward thinking, nobody else in the system is. And the Pentagon, listen to me, the Pentagon is designed for no change. It is staffed with people who benefit from the status quo, who were raised up in the status quo, and who want to perpetuate the status quo indefinitely. They don't ever want to hold anyone accountable unless it's for some narrow bands of moral failings or so. It's very rare that you see somebody other than like a ship captain, for example. And I think the aircraft carrier that had a recent wreck, that's one thing that'll get a senior officer fired, but one of the very few. And in the Army, there's almost nothing. I have lamented so many times over the years when you had generals that were abysmal failures in the most important things, combat, or in the advancement of future combat systems, the design of the future force, etc. Abysmal failures, and they get promoted. And they get big medals pinned on their chest for failing. It's shocking to me, and I've not hesitated written about it. That's not the only one I've written of that regard. And you've even seen us over the course of the year and a half or so we've been having this channel where I've said, fire the TV generals, don't listen to them, etc. I mean, we've been pounding this for a long time. And I think I even said not long ago that I hope that when they announced Secretary of Defense Hegseth, I said, hey, we need to, if he wants to get his agenda done, because he listed on his, not inauguration, on his, when he was given the oath of office, that he said that he was charged by the president to, reform the military, to reorganize, to rebuild deterrence, et cetera, make the Army stronger. And I said, man, that's great advice, charge. That's a great order. I want him to do it. But man, if he's going to need to do it, he's going to have to get rid of a lot of the dead wood, as was said by a former chief of staff of the Army in the 1930s on the eve of World War II. The President Delano Roosevelt said, hey, we need to make sure our fighting force is good. So they actually called, I think it turned out to be 500 senior colonels and generals from the old force who were wedded to the old ways so that they could get the new way of thinking into the force. Turned out pretty good then. And for us to get into that situation now, we're going to have to do the same thing. Now, as I've said many times, it's got to be done smart. It's got to be done right, so that it's not just, some kind of political vendetta. And I think Gary had a headline there that already people are terrified of that, oh, this is just a political charge and they're going after their political enemies. I hope it's not that, but that's what people are going to say no matter what, because this is very unorthodox. Nobody has done it. To my knowledge, it's never happened since the 1930s. I don't think there's been any kind of systematic clearing of the decks to bring in some different people, different leaders, to be able to lead the change and to make the force better. And that is so important because actually 2 days ago, Secretary Hegseth listed out a number of things. He said that he wants to be a lot more transparent than any Secretary of Defense has been in recent memory. And so he actually sat down in front of cameras and detailed some controversial other things that he's doing, but he is bold about what he's doing. Now, whether he succeeds in any of these remains to be seen, but I'm loving the things that he's saying here because these changes are long overdue. Let's look, first of all, at what he says is the core purpose of the Department of Defense.
Ever since I've taken this position, the only thing I care about is doing right by the warfighters, by the troops. In short, we want the biggest, most badass military on the planet, on God's green earth. I'm in this room right now, but I'm not alone. Behind the camera are lots of vets and military family members, along with other people who, like you, are invested in exactly what that core mission is.
And I can just tell you, as a former member of the armed forces, someone who has 4 combat deployments of my own, that is music to my ears to hear that you want to bring back the warfighter ethos, that you want the Pentagon to focus on doing its primary job, which is to fight and, if necessary, win wars to keep us safe. That's I suspect that you're going to see recruiting take a significant upturn in the rest of this year. I would wager that all 4 of the service branches, all 5 of the service branches will all meet their recruiting objectives, because I know that the people inside the military, I've already seen some anecdotal evidence of it already, are thrilled to hear somebody from their own ranks. Because remember, Hegseth himself had 2 combat deployments. He was a major, so a mid-ranking officer, somebody who's, low enough in rank that he gets the low, the regular fighting man, but kind of high enough too that he understands, some of the things that are going on at the upper echelons, et cetera. And apparently I think he got 2 Bronze Star medals for valor. I mean, he clearly is a war fighter. I've already seen some images on some of his trips overseas where he's doing physical training and working out with some of the troops. And of course, they're loving that kind of stuff. Man, it's almost unfair to juxtapose some of these visuals and some of these statements from Hegseth with his immediate predecessor, who we often lamented on this channel. Even when he's talking about troops that had been killed, he's literally reading off of a paper, talking like he's reading a line for, something like that. And you're like, where's your heart, Mr. Secretary? I never really saw that. And it was just kind of puzzling to me because he almost never gave extemporaneous comments. And when he did, they just seemed a little off. Not so with Hegseth. Now, some people have lamented that, here's a guy who was a TV guy. They have accused Hegseth of being, because he was obviously a Fox News personality before that. But he wasn't just a TV guy. He was first a highly decorated combat veteran. So he does have the stock from which is coming. And again, so far, he has been saying exactly the things that we need to do. And it sounds like he's on a good path to get them done. Okay, one of the next things he's saying that's also got some controversy in really a couple of different directions is this DOGE, right? So the DOGE has been in the news all over the place for making cuts across the federal government. Well, it turns out the Department of Defense is not immune to that. So first of all, he wants to frankly address what is going to be cut.
With DOGE, we're focusing as much as we can on headquarters and fat and redundancies and top-line stuff that allows us to reinvest elsewhere. We welcome DOGE, and finding those efficiencies is how we save taxpayer dollars. That is a good thing that, of course, is being distorted through the media, their hyperventilation, and it just goes entirely unreported for the most part.
Now, obviously, he gave a clue there. That was, I think, 2 days ago, so before the announcement of the firing of the generals, but he said headquarters staff. Now, that has been one of my pet peeves for the longest time. It's been Colonel Doug McGregor's pet peeves for many, many years, who's been on our show a lot. He has often lamented that the number of 4-star generals in the U.S. Army today is, I want to say it's like 38, and I may be getting these numbers not precisely right, but I believe that during the height of World War II, when we had, I think 8 million men in the Army under arms that were on active duty at the height. There was like 8, I think 7 or 8, something like that. A vast difference. The bloat in the headquarters has continued on. The Army will often say, "Hey, we have this new need here. We want to put in a special department here, and of course we need a 3 or a 4-star general to run it up." And so they put it in effect, and they start doing this job or whatever. Then the job kind of is done, it goes away, but the headquarters doesn't seem to. The 4-star or 3-star billet doesn't seem to ever go away. They just keep adding up there. And you got to ask, man, if the Army today is a 400 and whatever it is today, I don't know the exact number, 80,000, somewhere around 480,000. Why do we need so many Army 4-star generals when we had 8 million under arms? It was a fraction of that number. That just tells you they love headquarters. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, when you talk about how the Army is and how it operates today, and how it operated in the past, in light of new modern technologies and new ways of fighting, we are way, way, way behind the schedule. The sell-by date has expired on the way we do. But just consider, okay, so we've seen in the Russia-Ukraine war, we've talked a lot about the tactics of how the missions are fighting. Not radically different than it has been through centuries in the past. Just some things are different because of technology, and certainly with drones and artillery and rockets, you have to have more dispersion on the battlefield. But the 4 core fundamentals of fighting on the ground are not too different than they have been. So you have an infantryman, then you have an infantry squad, and then squads are made into platoons. Platoons are typically 20, 30 personnel. You have a company, which is somewhere around 100, 120. Then you have a battalion, and then brigades, etc. So, but on the fighting front, it's primarily, and really this war has shown on both sides of the line, it's the battalion and below. And usually it's company and below, because you just don't have these big formations. But the way we are organized today is that you still have, even in the way we set up for fight, the way we fought in Desert Storm, the way we fought in 2003 Iraq War, the way we're organized to fight today, you still have companies, platoons, and battalions are the primary on the ground fighting force. So we'll just stick with the battalion. So for a company and a platoon and a squad, an individual, basically it goes up through company and then to battalion headquarters. That's kind of where it goes. So from battalion headquarters, then you have to back up. You have a brigade headquarters, and then you have to back up and you have a division headquarters, and then you back up and you have a corps headquarters, and then or a regional headquarters, and then you back up and you have a theater headquarters. And then of course it gets on to the Pentagon and up on that. Just imagine all of these unnecessary, redundant headquarters, all to affect that same battalion. Why do you need so many? The answer is you don't, but that's how we've always done it. I mean, since World War I, that's the way we've been fighting. World War II, hardly any difference. Desert Storm, where I fought in an armored tank battle. 2003 Operation Iraqi Freedom. That's the last time we engaged in any large-scale operations. All of those things have been going on. And we fought this way, and we just keep all these additional redundancies, and especially with communication systems the way they are today, in the ability to even talk to the frontline guys from the Pentagon. Why do you need like 3 or 4 levels of headquarters in between there? You don't. And Doug McGregor, I don't have the book handy, I guess, right now. He has absolutely written the book, actually 2 or 3 books on this subject, and he has talked about the incredible need to cut headquarters, to cut a lot of this unnecessary redundancy and bureaucracy and whatever. It sounds like Pete Hegseth is on the right track, that he apparently recognizes that too, and everything's on the table. And as long as it's done well, and as long as it's done thoughtfully and with a lot of forethought, then that's going to be terrific, because there is a lot of things that can be cut. There's a lot of money that doesn't need to be spent in the budget. And it not only it gets to one of the other issues and why a lot of people are freaking out about this. Anytime anyone has ever talked about cutting the Pentagon, it immediately gets alarm bells all over the place. And they say, no, you can't do that. You can't cut it because they automatically equate cutting the Pentagon budget with cutting capacity. And I argue not cutting any of this redundant stuff is actually like an anchor on us. It's weighing down the Department of Defense and making it harder for us to be efficient and effective on the front line. So it is long overdue to have a wise and thoughtful cut of stuff that's not necessary, things that the technology has moved beyond, things that the art of warfare has moved beyond that aren't necessary. And those things are everywhere because nobody ever wants to cut anything. So something that made sense 10, 15 years ago doesn't make sense anymore, but it's still there and it gets funded every year. Those are the kinds of things he's talking about going after. That can save money because what we don't need to do is just keep forever sending the defense budget through the roof at the expense of other things the nation may need, especially if doing so makes us less capable. Now, those are the things he talked about that he's going to cut. He also talked about what he's not going to cut.
We also list on page 2, which I've marked up here in our memo, what is not part of the 8% refocusing of funds. It's stated very clearly here. Southwest border activities, combating transnational criminal organizations, an audit, nuclear modernization, Virginia-class submarines, the Golden Dome or Iron Dome, one-way attack drones, UAVs, cybersecurity, core readiness, training, the defense industrial base, and it goes on. They and other key programs are off the table under this program. They're too important, as are many other things.
Okay, those give you a little bit more of a clue into where he's going, and it's the right direction. I want to look at just a few of those. Border security he's talking about. That's something that's been long overdue. Look, again, I'll repeat, whatever the immigration policies are, that's something that Washington figures out. That's something that goes through the legislative process and just the way our laws are done. Whatever that is, fine. Come up to it. You don't like it, change it, no problem at all, as long as that's what's legally agreed to. But whatever is legally agreed to, we have to have a secure border so that only those people that we deem through our process are legal and authorized to come into the country that will benefit the country. Those are the only ones that need to come in. Anyone else has to go through the process or they can't come in. That should be so self-evident that no one should question it. And I mean, no one. Unless you want to have a legislative deal for open borders, which hardly anybody in America actually wants, then I guess
military's border mission.
You could under that circumstance, but no one has voted for that. And so as long as they haven't, that's the rule. That's the law of the land, that we have limitations and whatever. You need to secure the border because you don't want just whoever coming in, because you don't know if there could be molds coming in that could in the future, if we get into a conflict with somebody else, be activated. I mean, you can't rule that out. And if you don't know who's coming in, something like that, I would argue that an adversary would be stupid not to put some moles in the country if we have this open and porous border as a hedge. So let's don't give them a chance. Let's keep the border secure. One of the other things, a couple of things he's talking about that are nuclear capacity. He wants to make sure that's modern, it's reliable, and it's not going to let us down if it's ever needed. It's really important to keep that up. One of the other things he said there is more noteworthy: submarines. He specified submarines as opposed to just Navy because the nature of war has changed, and the surface war fleet, I'm telling you, has already undergone a radical change, and we just haven't recognized it yet. I think all of these aircraft carrier groups that we have, and we're continuing to build and fund more, those days have gone. Unless you're doing like a Haiti intervention or something against the Taliban or something in the Middle East where the adversary doesn't have an air force, doesn't have a missile force, then there's some utility in there. You can get that done. But do you really need all that firepower if that's the limited ability of your enemy? But if you're talking about a peer-to-peer competitor or a near-peer competitor, somebody who does have an air force, who does have a navy, who does have naval drones, who does have anti-ship missiles, etc., those surface ships are going to get knocked out. And you don't have to go any further than to look the Russia-Ukraine war and to see what happened with the Russian Black Sea Fleet. it had to completely relocate outside of the range of the Ukraine side just because of their, I think it was called the Poseidon missiles and these naval drones that have become now proliferated. And I promise you, everybody in the world is seeing that these really inexpensive, relative speaking drones, naval drones, and probably undersea drones as well, can wreak havoc on a surface fleets. And the days of the aircraft carrier and these big battleships, or warships, I'm sorry, the battleships have long since been mothballed, but even like the cruisers, the destroyers, etc., anything that floats can be sunk. And the defenses have been outpaced by offensive capacity. But the submarine, though, is still very, very difficult for enemies to find. So we need to expand our use on that if we want to be able to project power, if we want to be able to have mobile firepower that can move successfully around the water or can interdict enemy submarine warfare. You need a lot more submarine and anti-submarine warfare capacity. That's just where the things are going. So it shows that Hegseth is focused on the right thing and is looking forward. That's really good news. Two of the other things I'll talk about real quickly. He talked about specifically UAVs, drones, etc. That is absolutely significantly changing the nature of ground war and the land war. So the fact that he's focusing on those anti-drone capabilities, electronic warfare, etc., all those things are going to be really, really important and necessary going forward. So he's focused on the right thing there too. This what they call the Golden Dome or the Iron Dome system for the United States, air defense capacity. Obviously, the side that can defend itself against enemy aerial attack, enemy drone attack, enemy missile attack is going to be the side that has the best chance to win, because right now that's exactly how it's playing out in the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine is deficient in all those categories. Russia is superior, and it's playing out then on the front lines, which continue to move in the direction that the Russians want. So the fact that he's focused on all those kinds of things, it gives me a lot of confidence that the secretary is moving our force in the right direction. Let's see, what was the last one here? Oh, yeah. So those are some of the bigger headlines that we've talked about here that Hegseth is doing about where he's going to take the force. There's one other thing he's doing here, and he's talking about accountability. And another thing that just warms my heart, because it's long overdue that we've not had any accountability for any kind of failure. As I mentioned a minute ago, that I talked about during the Afghan war, there's people who were, terrible failures were getting promoted and sent up. Apparently that's coming to an end because there's, let's see, the news this morning out is that Hegseth is about to launch an investigation into the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And see this is the Breitbart is saying exclusive. He has tapped investigators for the botched Afghan withdrawal, and accountability will be coming. That is something that is so important to know. Something that people in the service have been it's just egregious when they see these guys who were doing the fighting, the guys who were on the ground, who have been making the plans and doing things in terms of war fighting capabilities, in terms of the future combat systems, the acquisition programs that I've talked about, people who do the work and they see what's working and they see what's not. And then they see the guys above either covering it over, lying, or just distorting and say, no, it's really not that. And then they see the thing fall apart and they see these guys continue to go up the line because, as I said, the system protects itself. The system replicates itself. It wants these guys to stay in. It doesn't matter what's happening on the ground. And they feel bulletproof because no one's ever held to account for this kind of failure. Apparently, Hegseth is saying those days are coming to an end. And this is in stark contrast to the way things have always been and the way the previous administration was. You may recall that I believe it was June 2023, the Biden administration, who conducted the Afghan withdrawal, published a report in the State Department that said, okay, we've identified a few problems and some lessons learned, et cetera. But then the question came, okay, but you've identified some things that failed. Who was held to account for? Because a lot of things went wrong during that withdrawal. And as I said many times at the time, and we'll repeat again here, I give President Biden credit for leaving Afghanistan. Because we had been there for 20 years. It was a feudal war, should have been ended a long, long time before that. And he took a lot of political heat, and I congratulate him for doing so, and still to this day do. I'm glad that he gave that decision. That said, I said the way it was conducted was terrible. And it wasn't just that enduring image that'll never be filed away. That was just the disaster, the way it was done here. And the Biden administration itself deserves some blame for what happened, because they were the ones in charge. But also people in the Pentagon have deserved a lot of credit and for what happened, and blame for it. And no one was ever held to account. And here's the way it was put. So shortly after this report came out in 2023 about the Afghanistan, Ducey from Fox News at a press conference in the White House asked John Kirby who's going to be held responsible for this.
John, who's going to get fired over this?
Peter, the purpose of the document that we're putting out today is to sort of collate the chief reviews and findings of the agencies that did after action reviews. It's not the purpose of it is not accountability.
The purpose of the review was not accountability? What in the hell? Why would you do a report if there's not going to be an accountability for anything that went wrong? I mean, just think of how self-defeating that is. You're telling me that the administration of the United States of America, the president and all of his folks, the Pentagon, they do an after-action report and they've identified this was wrong, this made a mistake, etc. And now then you're going to say, but we're not going to do anything about it? We're just going to learn the lessons. And listen, I was in the Army long enough to understand that when you do lessons learned, the whole point is so that the next guy who's got a similar mission will pick it up and say, okay, don't do this. This was a mistake. And, and at least on the tactical level, people who failed were held accountable. If you couldn't pass muster as a company commander, you're not going to get promoted up the line. And if you go to like the National Training Center, the Combat Maneuver Training Center in Europe, and you can't get it done and you fail, you're going to be held accountable and you're not going to get promoted. In fact, if it's bad enough, you could even lose your command. And certainly that was the case at the lower level in combat. But unfortunately, it never applied at the top level. Well, that appears to be changing. So again, if Hegseth does this the right way, if he focuses on what's mission critical and it doesn't get into any of this deal where it's just political payback, we're going to get somebody because we didn't like them. I certainly hope that doesn't happen, but it needs to happen that people who were not, who did a bad job, who were, in positions of power and authority and failed to do the right thing, and people died as a result of it, and missions failed as a result of it, they need to be held accountable. They need to be removed from power, not promoted and moved up the way. So no one is going to, in the system right now, is going to like this. They're all going to, work against it. All these things that Hegseth is wanting to do and change, they're not going to succeed if he doesn't get the dead wood out. Just like that happened in 1938, 39. That same thing has to happen here. And then you elevate, you put people up who are quality. Hegseth has said many times that it's going to be based on merit. People who can get the job done, they have proven it, and then they produce when they get into position. And if they don't, they're going to be taken out. If you replace this current system of, hey, it's just a good old boy club here, and if you look like me, and if you act like me, and you do the stuff that we say, and you support what we tell you to support, and you resist what we say resist, you can be in the 4-star general club. As long as we get rid of that and replace it with one that genuinely is based on meritocracy and accountability and sets a very high standard, we will be in good shape. And that's something is long, long overdue. So I applaud the Secretary of Defense and wish him well going forward. One last thing I want to talk about today before we get off here, because I saw this morning and I just cringed when I saw it. Many of we often talk about the Russia-Ukraine war and whatever's going on in our current day. And, some of the times we're just baffled by why so many people seem to be confused on the fundamentals of combat reality and just looking at the way the war is developing, et cetera. And I'm going to show you just one example here that I think helps to explain why so many regular people are so confused on things. We've had Ian Puddock, the smartest man in London, on the show many times. We've talked to him about this in the UK situation. And he says, because the mainstream media is always given this rosy outlook, and it's not talking about things that are negative, and they just focus on what The narrative is that's supposed to come out based on what apparently some in the government think. Well, whether it's an outright plan or not, or somebody's pulling the strings, I can't tell you. But I can say that here is what mainstream folks are saying in the United States that is so far off base, and yet it's presented as evidence and facts. And if all you do is just a regular person, and you're not going to spend the time I do every day, you're not going to be digging into 5 and 6 different sources for each story and spend hours a day reading this stuff like I do. If you have time to see something on your screen as you're scrolling by, or you just read the headlines of the daily, all you know is what the New York Times or the CNN or some of these other networks tell you. Well, I'm going to show you one thing here. This is Christian Amanpour, who's interviewing M. Gessen. I'm not sure how his name is pronounced, from the New York Times. And they're going to be talking about what is the current situation in regards to what Trump is doing in the aftermath of him calling Zelensky a dictator without an election. So here's the way they're viewing it. Here's Christian Amanpour.
Putin has said that all of this reaction is, quote, hysteria, and that why shouldn't we talk to the US? And of course, Ukraine will be involved. Is there anything that you could say might be happening behind the scenes that wouldn't result in essentially throwing Ukraine under the bus and isolating Europe?
I really believe at looking at the thing and not looking for the thing behind the thing. I think we know what's happening. They're telling us. And Putin has been telling us what he wants for a very long time. He wants to get back to the post-World War II status quo, when the world was divided between the United States and the Soviet Union. He feels like he has been dealt a bad deal in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that Russia he personally deserves, to get back to Yalta and to divide up the world again. I see Zelensky as the only politician on the world stage right now whom we're actually seeing having the courage of his convictions. He's calling things what they are. He is speaking up for a democratic Europe. He's calling for Europe to mobilize for the interests and the values that it was founded upon. And he is the only person doing that.
That is breathtakingly wrong. And I don't know if this New York Times writer believes what they're saying. I don't know if they're just repeating what they've heard. I just can't tell you. All I can say with complete conviction and certainty is that they are dead wrong on 2 profound issues in there. First of all, he's really, really off on what Putin said. He's claiming that, well, Putin wants to recreate the Soviet Union in a sense. He wants to divide the world into 2, that the whole purpose of the whole thing has been to gain power and to go back to some kind of Cold War thing. And now he's working in cahoots, presumably, with Trump, that we're going to split it between an American, sphere and a sphere of interest for the Soviet side. Oh, I'm sorry, the Russian side. You see, in his mind, they're still the same thing. And then when you actually look at what Putin has said, and we'll do that in just a minute, you're like, wait a minute, if you have actually paid attention to what Putin has said, and I'm talking about going back to 2008, pardon me, 2008 at the Bucharest summit, to 2007, even before that, at the Munich Security Conference, or in 2014, when there was this, the disrupted election and the overthrow of the legally elected government in Ukraine by people who didn't like Russia. And we supported that. We didn't support the rule of law. We supported the side that we liked, even though it overturned a legally elected government. We didn't care about that. They posted that. They said, look, if you keep on talking about bringing NATO into Ukraine, especially after what you've done here, it's a red line for us. We're going to take action. They have never said anything about reconquering anything. To the contrary, Russia had actually said in that 2007 Munich conference, that they wanted to incorporate with Europe. They wanted to work together, but they were concerned that there seemed like a hostility from the West, and they were continuing to expand NATO. Every time Russia gets a chance, they keep saying NATO advancing to our border is a red line. We're not going to tolerate it any more than you would. Didn't say anything about recreating the Soviet Union, about conquering any land. It was exclusively always up to the very moment that they went into conflict, because they said it's the NATO encroachment to our border is what's going to cause this. And then they told us privately, they told Biden himself, they told NATO through Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, NATO and Ukraine equals war, period. That's all. And then they wanted a cooperation with Europe. They were making economic integrations. They were sending their fuel, gas, and other petroleum products at a low price, something that was allowing the Western economies to prosper. They wanted to integrate. They had no interest. They had no actions whatsoever talking about, and they wanted to conquest. It was only the Western side which kept encroaching closer and closer to the Russian border. We just want to ignore that. And then here you have Putin continuing to say the first few days of the war, he wants to negotiate a settlement to end the conflict. The first 2 months in Istanbul, he wants to end the conflict. And again, at least in one other time with Turkey's help, they were trying to get some. It didn't get very far during the war. And then the last one in June of last summer, again, he lays out conditions. This is what a negotiated settlement will look like. We want to end the war right then. Imagine if we had taken him at his word then and actually went to seek peace at that point. The war could have been over by months now and all the killing could be stopped. But instead, you have this New York Times writer continuing to feed the flame that, no, this is something that's going the completely opposite. And don't take my word for it again. It's this. I'm telling you what Putin said. Let me show you. Here's what Putin did say.
As for other participants, first of all, Russia has never refused contact with Europeans. Russia has never rejected the negotiation process with Ukraine, never. It was our so-called partners in those negotiations who refused. The Europeans cut off contact with Russia, while the Ukrainian side prohibited itself from engaging in negotiations and withdrew from the Istanbul negotiation process, openly and publicly announcing it. Well, we are not forcing anything on anyone. We are ready. I've said this 100 times. If they want to negotiate, they're welcome to do so, and we will be ready to return to the negotiating table.
Now, does that sound like the guy who just wants to cleave the world into a new East and West divide, that wants to conquer anything, who keeps saying over and over, and that's verifiable, it's on the record, West and East, that he's been trying to have this negotiated and get off the table and end the conflict, ergo, not cleave it into an East and West, not conquer anybody else. And yet, only because I'm showing you on the screen, here's what Putin is saying. This is just a few days ago. And has been saying for years, and I just laid out from 2007 forward to today, one consistent message he has always said. You don't hear any of that in the New York Times. You don't hear any of that from Christiane Amanpour. She didn't push back on it at all. And whether it was on PBS, as that one was, or on CNN, where she's on other times, or on her own show in different places, you don't hear any of that. So if the person who's just, scrolling through on their phone and they land on this, then they think, well, it must be right because the moderator didn't push back on it. And this is a New York Times, the alleged standard of Western democracy, the standard of journalism in the Western world, the New York Times, is grossly off the plate. And then the last thing that they were so far off on is Zelensky. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. But the reason why everybody's up in arms right now, because Trump used the crude language to call him a dictator without an election. And he said he's sick of it and he's tired of how he's being treated, et cetera. Trump is a little over the top in his hyperbole. He always has been. But when you look at why he's that way and why he's talking that way, and as we've shown you again throughout the entire course of this war, that Zelensky is detached from reality. This New York Times reporter actually said he's the only one who is seeing the world as it is. And I'm thinking, my God, are you that disconnected from reality yourself? Are you so fooled? Did you believe what you're saying? Because it is fundamentally clear that this guy is detached from reality. Zelensky, at this late hour, still wants security guarantees. He wants some other nation in Europe to put its own national security on the line and risk a war with Russia to try and rescue this dying patient of Ukraine that's already lost the war. It's past tense. The only question remaining is where the final end will be and what the final tally will be. But the end is already known. And he also wants nuclear weapons, which he said on Piers Morgan the other day. Does that sound like something that's rational to you? That anyone in the West is just going to hand the guy a nuclear weapon? Someone who is so disconnected from reality that if he used it, it would automatically get the return address would be attacked by Russia in response? I mean, that's absurd that even someone like this New York Times reporter would recoil from. And yet he's defending him. He's defending Zelensky as being someone that is, the only rational thinker, the only one that's seen it for, standing for democracy. He hasn't conducted an election since the war started out. The United States did during our Civil War, but I guess that's different somehow. He has banned Zelensky has banned political parties he doesn't like, has banned newspapers and other media that he doesn't like, has jailed anyone who says something against him, has sent people to the front if they dare to say the wrong things in public, has banned religious organizations that he doesn't like. This is the democracy guy that you want to keep on defending? And yet this passes for elite Western media. And this is why so many people recoil when they see some of the things Trump's doing, which I'm showing you make enormous sense. And it has the best chance to save the lives of these Ukrainian people. That's what people like Gessin and so many other of the media, whether in the UK or the United States, just are oblivious to. Their reporting like this has enabled the Ukrainian people to die in larger numbers by continuing to get public support and money and everything else to keep a war on life support that should have ended a long time ago. The best case you could have ever had to be rational would have expired in 2023 when the Ukraine side did everything it could to try an offensive maneuver to force Russia out. It was obliterated, broke its teeth on the first defense line. I've told you before. By any rational person's observation, then you could say, okay, we did everything we could. It didn't even Russia's getting stronger. We'll never get a second shot at this. Let's end the war right now. That's what should have happened. But instead, the deception continued on, or the disconnection from reality. I can't really say for sure what it is in any individual case. I can just tell you that it's been untrue. And the bill payer for all this has been the Ukrainian people. And I know for sure, because I've heard from some reports that especially those that are close to the line of contact are sick of it, and they just want the killing to stop because they see all it can do by continuing on is to get more of them killed. And I don't know why anyone would want to do that. I hope, sometime in the future, there's an accounting for all of this, soul searching, something like that, as this recedes into the background. Once it gets off the table, God willing, soon, that people start saying, golly, how did we get into this situation here? Why did our mainstream media outlets report all of these things so consistently for so many years when it was, now we can see, evidently never true? And it was always clear that they were going to lose on the Ukraine side. I hope that happens. Something that we're going to continue to do every day we get a chance, because we are unintimidated and uncompromised on this channel to bring you the truth, no matter what it is, so that you can see what's really happening. And that's our show for today. I really appreciate you joining us. Just be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't. And we will look very much forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.